First hunt, now. The black 4x4 drew to a halt on the sparsely gravelled path. A pair of legs swung out from the rear door into the cool moonlit night. Their owner drew in a deep, refreshing breath of Highland air and smiled to himself. It was a curious sensation, as he performed it just for pleasure, and not actually for the act of respiration. He had no need for that now. He was, for all intents and purposes, dead. "You okay?" Dave Nichols, former proprietor of a small comic book shop in the city in the northwest of England, turned to the woman, if you could call her that, who had taken his mortal life. "Never been better," he smiled. "Never been better." Nightingale closed the passenger's door with a solid click and made her way round to the newly born offspring. She took his hands in hers and smiled up into his eyes. "Good. I'm glad." "Everything feels so different," the newborn whispered into the night. I know that's a cliche, but that's okay. I was totally the same. There's so much for you to learn. That's why we've come here." There was a solid clunk as the driver's door shut. "So hadn't we better get on with it then?" came a clipped masculine voice. "We only have a few hours until sunrise." "Patience, Marcus." Nightingale turned to her long-standing companion. "We'll go and settle ourselves down in the cabin. We'll be perfectly safe in there until the sun comes up." And with that, she led her companion and the child up the gravel path towards the old cabin that stood overlooking the sea from the cliffside. After just a few steps, she and the older of the two males stopped dead in their tracks. "What is it?" Dave asked. Nightingale flicked a sideways glance to Marcus, and he was suddenly a blur of colours as he streaked up the rest of the path to the cabin and in through the door. "Nightingale?" She held a hand up to silence the child as her sharp eyes scanned the ground between them and the cabin. A few seconds later, Marcus opened the door again and walked at a more sedate pace back towards the car. "It's all clear," he said. Nightingale frowned. "But they've definitely been here." It was a statement, not a question. Marcus nodded slowly. "There's something else too." Nightingale cocked her head to one side in a question, but a progeny cut in before Marcus could answer. "Who? Who's been here?" The young mother looked the child straight in the eye. "Constructs." Dave looked on, feeling somewhat helpless as the other two vampires circled the immediate area around the cabin. Every now and then, one or both of them would stand still, scent the air, then crouch to examine the rough ground. He had no idea what was going on. It was obviously something of importance in danger, but as to its exact nature. So he stood propped against the 4x4 and waited until the others had completed their recce before making their way back to him. "What's going on?" he asked. "This is supposed to be a safe house," Nightingale explained. "We often bring newborns here to help them through their initial transition and to train them. It is known to no one outside of our community." "And yet constructs have been here," Marcus growled, his eyes flitting from spot to spot as if seeing things that were not there. "And there's been fighting." Dave ran his fingers through his sandy-coloured hair. "Okay, so I'm guessing this is bad." Nightingale nodded. "Very. And there's more." Marcus began pointing to various spots around the cabin. "There's been some sort of battle here. There is dried blood on the ground and bullet cases. There was a firefight." Dave frowned. "Bullets? So they weren't after a vampire then?" Nightingale smiled. "Good logic. The blood is neither construct nor vampire. Come and see this." She led her child over to the edge of the cliff. "See here where the stone has crumbled. There are splatter patterns around the damaged stone. Bend down close and smell it." Dave did as instructed. He knelt on one knee and lowered his nose to the ground. He caught a symphony of fragrances: grass, soil, sea, rock, and he gasped as the sweetest aroma he had ever tasted hit his brain. "Wow! What is that? I feel like I'm smelling a rainbow." Marcus turned to Nightingale and lifted a sardonic eyebrow. Nightingale smiled softly. "We don't know. It's definitely not construct. You remember what that tasted like?" Dave nodded, recalling a few nights back ago in Lancaster, when his new instincts had taken over and he attacked a woman who, at the time, he had not consciously known to be a construct. It was dark, artificial, as if someone had made something to appear like human blood, but had not quite got it right. There was also that grainy aftertaste. Correct. Nightingale crouched down next to him. Quite unlike your friend's blood. Dave shuddered at that thought. He'd been forced to drink the blood of Sam Spallucci, the man who had been taking care of him. If he had not done so, he would have remained incomplete. His blood was so alive. Exactly. Sam is a living creature. Constructs are just what their name suggests. They've been made to look like humans. This, however, she traced her finger along the dark stain on the rocks, is something completely different. Someone very special was here. Dave straightened up and ran his fingers through his mop of hair. Oh, this is so confusing. There's so much to learn. Tell me more. Tell me about the constructs. They are soulless demons. Marcus's deep voice cuts across the still night. They have no conscience or ounce of goodness in them. They are creations, simulacra, intended to infiltrate humanity and sit there, waiting. Waiting? What for? Nightingale stood and lightly brushed some dirt off her trousers. We're not entirely sure. Part of the problem is that most of them do not know what they are. They are sleeper agents of some sort, programmed to wake at a specific moment or on cue. They can spend years thinking they are human. They may have mundane, day-to-day jobs, or they may have positions of power. Wherever they are, we have to track them down and kill them. Why? Nightingale answered with deep sadness. Because if we don't, then they will eradicate our kind. As soon as they awaken, their true nature becomes manifest, and they will hunt down the nearest child of Cain and slaughter him or her, no matter what the consequence. We have lost many to them. The three vampires started to walk towards the cabin as the youngster mulled this over. So, if they are sleepers, then who programmed them? Cainor. The one word from Marcus's lip was spat like a curse. Until you had your vision, we had no name for him. But now we know our enemy. Dave stopped and stared down at his feet. And I will die in his presence. He felt a cool hand brush his cheek. We cannot change our future, my child. But we can do what we must for that which we hold to be of utmost importance. He lifted his eyes and looked into Nightingale's sad orbs. Find the Eternals, protect the twins, await the divergence. Nightingale nodded. That's right. That is what the very first of our kind was instructed to do, and we must follow their example. They resumed their walk to the cabin. By our very first, do you mean Cain? Marcus opened the old wooden door, and they entered the shack. It was dark and smelt musty. There were, however, obvious signs that it had been recently inhabited. A dead fire in the hearth, blankets on the small bed, and food left discarded on the table. The older of the two male vampires picked up the smell of stale bread and sniffed it with disgust. Cain was visited by a stranger just after he slew his brother Abel. He was full to the brim of remorse and regret at his rash action. The stranger gave him a chance for redemption. He turned him into a vampire and told him to go out and spread his kind amongst the human world with those 3 instructions. So that is what we have done since the dawn of civilization. He tossed the bread with precision into a bucket that sat next to the fire. A small cloud of ashes plumed up in its wake. So, Dave asked as he was settling into a creaking wooden chair that felt in danger of imminent collapse. Who was the stranger? Nightingale perched in front of him on the table and smiled. He was an angel. We have angelic blood coursing through our veins. Here it was starting to be a night of revelations. Creatures fashioned and sent by some big bad to wipe out vampires. The father of all vampires was in fact an angel. If he had been a smoker, then Dave would have been puffing his way through about a pack of 20. Are there any more little secrets you'd like to tell me about? His mother smiled lovingly at him. Oh, there are plenty, my child. But right now we have a more pressing matter. She rose and made her way over to a grubby window. Closing her eyes, she inhaled deeply before turning to her companion. 2? She asked. That was my count, Marcus agreed. Over in the woods. I imagine they have seen us and are waiting to see where we go so that they can follow us. Nightingale nodded. Very well. Turning to Dave, she grinned. Well, it appears tonight you're going to have your first practical lesson. You're going to learn how to hunt. A short while later, Dave was creeping through the undergrowth of a nearby copse with Nightingale at his side. He was trying his best to move stealthily, but to his hypersensitive hearing, every step sounded like a thunderclap and every broken stick a gunshot. "Surely they'll hear us," he asked in a voice that sounded to him like a tornado ripping through a densely populated city. Nightingale slowly shook her head, not for once taking her eyes off the shadows that danced between the trees and the moonlight. "We are superior in every way. We move faster and with greater stealth. We have heightened senses. They are no different to humans except for their physical makeup. They will not hear us unless we make a drastic mistake." Physical makeup? "Constructs are not creatures of flesh and blood," the older vampire explained. "They are made from a clay-like substance that allows them to resemble humans and blend into society. Be careful, though. They are killers and can adapt to a form accordingly." Dave ran his fingers through his hair again. He felt less than reassured. "So whereabouts is Marcus now?" "Close your eyes and inhale slowly. See what your senses tell you." The young vampire did as he was instructed. He lightly closed his eyelids and drew a long, deep breath in through his nose. There were the fresh green leaves, the grass, the soil. Those scents were all pervading, as if he was enveloped in a blanket woven by Mother Nature herself. Then there was an acrid tang that reminded him of cities. Diesel? Yes, it was the car in which they had driven to this place. Curiously, he could pinpoint it way back behind them, which told him that the cabin lay a small distance to the rear. He concentrated on what was passing over the cells in his nose and picked up two more distinct smells. One was crisp and clean, fresh, with the scent of expensive cologne. That was Marcus. He let his brain play with a strength and intensity that it recognised as the norm for when the older vampire was standing in his presence, and that, along with his skin feeling the slight breeze of the night, gave him an answer. He was just about to say that their companion was in the region of 50 metres away when the second scent muscled its way into his senses. Dave grunted with revulsion. Oh, it was a scent that was wrong. It smelt human, but had an earthy undercurrent that told of dark, dank places next to fetid swamps. He almost gagged as he snapped his eyes open and rubbed his mouth on the back of his hand. Nightingale was looking straight at him. Good. You smelt them, didn't you? Yes, they are very close. Marcus is a bit further away. He will come at them from the other side as planned, she explained. Lead on. Take me to them. She gestured with an arm deeper into the woods. As the two vampires walked slowly through the dense undergrowth, a stray thought crossed Dave's mind. Nightingale? Yes, my child. Do we have a leader? Some sort of king vampire? He expected an amused chuckle, but instead there was a sorrowful sigh. That is an awkward question to answer at the moment. Why? Well, Nightingale paused as she obviously sought out the simplest explanation. We do have a structure for leadership. To simplify it somewhat, our leader has always been the oldest vampire in the bloodline closest to the original source. So, in the beginning, it would have been Cain. Cain then had children. When he died, the oldest took the role of leader. When he died, then his child took over, and so on. If the vampire died without leaving an heir, then their sibling would become king or queen. It is very similar to human monarchy. Okay, so who's in charge now then? Nightingale stopped and leaned against a tree. The situation is somewhat complex. Dave frowned. How? The head of a line at the moment never wanted to be king. To make it worse, She momentarily examined the earth at her feet before looking back up. He suffered a great loss that broke his mind. He is not stable. So you have no leader at the moment? We have a regent. And who is that? Silence hung between them in the woods until Nightingale volunteered. That would be me. And now we are going to have to change the subject. We have work to do. Dave gave a quick nod. He guessed it was best not to annoy the new boss. So what's the plan? You go in there quickly and you kill them both. Dave felt his stomach clench with sudden apprehension. Me? He hissed in the dark. There was no reply. He turned to where Nightingale had been standing and saw empty woods. He was on his own. Nightingale looked down from the canopy. She could easily make out her child down below. He was frantically turning this way and that in blind panic, all recent lessons apparently forgotten as he tried to locate her. Not once did he look up. She smiled softly. This would be fun to watch. As light as her namesake, she skipped from branch to branch, hardly causing a stir. The reddening leaves of autumn did not rustle, and in a few seconds she was nestled on top of a large tree by a clearing. There they were. She inhaled slowly. The air reeked of them, their foulness, their wrongness. She swallowed hungrily as she learned to leap down and dispatch them, drain them of their life. What spur Dad was not to be tonight, not unless something went drastically wrong. Tonight belonged to her offspring, just as the night of her first hunt had belonged to her so many years ago. Her brow creased with amusement. Who was she kidding? She was under 200 years old, a mere child in vampire years. There are others out there who are in their thousands, ones who had seen ancient empires rise and fall. Yet she was their superior. She was their ruler through right of birth. This was not a path she desired, but such was her fate. It had fallen in her lap, and she had to deal with it, just as one day she would have to deal with her older brother. However, that's a thought for another time. Right now, she had to watch and wait. Okay, Dave muttered under his breath. I can do this. I've done it before without even thinking. It can't be that hard, can it? He thought back to the night in Lancaster. Instincts had taken over automatically. He had sensed the construct and just reacted. His muscles had responded without any prompting, and he had zeroed in on her, grasping her tight and plunging his teeth in. Rhythmically, he rocked back on the balls of his feet, concentrating on the two presences in the clearing ahead. He focused all his senses on them and felt his body prepare for the charge. His stomach growled in hunger. That was good. He was ready. Yes, he was. He swung his arms back and forth by his sides, just as he used to in gym class when he was preparing to sprint down the running track. Back and forth they swung, long pendulums, building up potential power, ready to propel him after his prey. He closed his eyes, breathed deep, placed a foot forward ready to run, and came to a sudden stop after one footfall. What was he doing? This was insane. They'd not done anything to him. How could he take their lives? He'd been repulsed after his attack on the girl in the sugar house. It made him physically sick. When he had found a corpse outside, exsanguinated and dumped, it had screamed against all his moral values. It had been wrong. He ran his fingers through his sandy hair in frustration. Oh, this was not good. What was he to do? He had an idea. He would go and watch them first, creep up to the edge of the clearing and spy on them. Surely, if they were evil incarnate, then he would be able to see, and then he would attack. Yes, that's what he would do. That was a plan. With a large helping of stealth and a good dose of trepidation, Dave carefully picked his way to the edge of the clearing. Gradually, he began to make out darkness rather than trees as he approached the edge of the wooded area. His ears picked out two voices as his prey talked to each other. He listened in. It was hardly the machinations of evil geniuses. They were discussing television. One was berating the judges of Strictly Come Dancing for letting some overweight TV chef take part, even though in the speaker's honest opinion he was completely talentless. His companion berated him and told him not to be so heartless. He told him that it was only a television show, not the end of the world. They then went on to discuss the X Factor and Simon Cowell. Dave frowned. They could not be evil creatures, surely. Did Nightingale have it wrong? Was she mistaken? Had his own senses deceived him earlier? If only one way to find out. He stepped out into the clearing. Hello there, he called out. What on earth was he doing? Nightingale almost broke the branch of a tree as her grip increased exponentially to her sudden anxiety. Her eyes must surely be deceiving her. Dave was actually walking over to constructs and talking to them. Actually talking to them. She looked over to the other side of the clearing. She could just make out the broken outline of Marcus, partially obscured by undergrowth. He had her child covered, but all the same, this was going horribly wrong. What was he thinking? Part of her was screaming that she ought to jump down and intervene, slay the creatures where they stood. But that would defeat the object of the exercise. This was Dave's night, she had to leave him be. And other vampires wondered why she had taken so long to decide to become a mother. The two men turned and faced Dave as he stepped out of the tree line. He saw looks of worry pass between their confused faces. Okay, he could do this. No need to panic. I was just passing by and overheard you. One of the strangers turned towards him. In a forest? In the middle of the night? Dave winced. Yes, it did sound odd now he thought about it. I like night walks, he smiled amiably. They're so refreshing. Both of the strangers were now standing up in the middle of the clearing, providing him with a perfect view of them. One was in his 40s, fairly stout, with grey hair, and the other was a few years younger, slim and blonde. Both of them had a backpack on the ground at their feet. They looked for all intents and purposes like a couple of walkers, certainly not homicidal maniacs. If anyone filled that role right now, it was the crazy guy who had just walked out of the woods. Dave sighed. This was not going to plan. Listen, to be honest, I'm kind of lost. I think I took the wrong path a while back. Have you guys got a map? The younger one looked to the older, who raised an eyebrow and shrugged. Sure, said Blondie. It's in my pack. Come over here and I'll dig it out for you. He bent over and started to unfasten his bag. Dave walked over to the two men and presented his friendliest smile. Well, this is very kind of you. As he turned to watch the younger man rummage in his bag, he heard a noise that sounded like mud sliding off a Wellington boot. His instinct screamed, and he swiveled to see the older man bearing down on him. His attacker's hand had transformed into a long, dark stake. He'd been thrust towards his chest when there was a blur, and suddenly the man's head was missing. The decapitated body carried forward with its momentum, pushing it on, and toppled over at Dave's feet. He saw Marcus coming to a stop a couple of metres away with the man's head in his hands. The young vampire felt a change in the air around him. Without thinking, leapt at the blonde man who was now charging towards Marcus. Dave flew through the air and clung onto his target's back, gripping his prey's right hand as it slipped and slid into a long, hard weapon akin to that of his late companion's. The construct discharged a rough grunt as it was manhandled to the floor. Rage and hunger welled up inside the hunter, who drew his head back, exposing his sharp teeth before plunging them down into his victim's neck. The vampire drank heavily, imbibing furiously on the thick liquid that passed for the creature's blood. As he drank, he felt the writhing and wriggling of his prey lessen, and his physical form weakened under his weight. He gripped the creature tight in his grasp, and as its skin desiccated, he felt its stake hand snap off between his tightly clasping fingers. There was nothing. The husk of a body could give him no more. It was empty, and Dave's immediate hunger had been sated. He pushed off from the corpse and cried into the still night air as fire rocketed around his veins and capillaries. Kneeling in the grass, he panted heavily as his dead heart pumped invigorating lifeblood around his body. He realised that his eyes were closed, and when he opened them, he saw Marcus draining the decapitated remains of the other construct. He had sunk his teeth deep into one of its wrists, and was sucking every drop of remnant life from its withering form. A soft footstep drew Dave's heightened attention, and he felt a rather familiar hand caress his hair. He leaned into his mother's touch. Come, my child, soothed Nightingale's soft voice. The night is late, and we have much to do.